hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
Belief. Overwhelmed.
Why are you hitting yourself?
No.
Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Why are you hitting yourself?
Disintegration. Cleansing.
Thorns. Sometimes called damage reflection or damage return, Thorns is a concept in ARPGs referring to passive damage that enemies take when they hit you. Instead of attacking directly, you let monsters hit your character, which deals damage back to them. In turn, active Thorns is the player's ability to deal their Thorns damage on demand, for example, by attacking with a certain unique weapon, without actually needing an enemy to attack or hit you. Path of Exile's intended Thorns mechanic is damage reflection. However, offensive modifiers do not scale a character's reflected damage, and there is no way for reflect damage to leverage the more multipliers from support gems. This makes it practically impossible to use in endgame content. You simply can't reasonably scale reflect damage high enough for it to be useful. However, in this video I will showcase the mechanics of a new build archetype in Path of Exile 1, which combines life stacking and skill cost manipulation to create Thorns-like gameplay. The result is a virtually unkillable character with active Thorns damage greater than 25 million DPS, scaling higher in dense content thanks to additional passive Thorns damage. Hello, I am Surgeon General. I assembled this build in patch 3.28 Mirage League, and while it used some borrowed power, none of the temporary league items are strictly necessary, and the build should function in future leagues or standard with minor modification. My final setup was at an investment between 1 and 2 mirrors, but a minimum viable product could be assembled for around 200 divines. There's a Path of Building link in the description below, which has the final version of my character, as well as what I think is the minimum version that you can get away with. Use the drop-down menus for passive trees and item sets to switch between versions. That being said, I highly suggest sticking around for the mechanics guide because this is a complicated build with a finicky setup. There are a few crucial breakpoints and tricks that POB doesn't make obvious. If you prefer to read a text version of the guide, I'll link to the official forum guide in the description. Life stacking can be very powerful. In addition to the obvious benefit of being very tanky from a large health pool, life stacking mechanics can be used to turn your life into damage as well. Rathpith Globe grants % spell damage and spell critical strike chance based on the player's maximum life. Unlight Silhouette from the Nameless bloodline grants skills flat added chaos damage based on their life cost. Using these two mechanics together causes your damage to scale quadratically with your character's life, letting you focus your items and passive trees on a single stat. This is a very efficient way to build a well-rounded character. Unfortunately, Rathpith Globe and Unlight Silhouette also come with downsides. Both require you to spend or sacrifice life in order to cast the spells that benefit from their scaling. This taxes your character's life recovery and is a serious problem. Without sufficient recovery, you will be unable to continue casting your spells, causing damage falloff, and you will eventually die to chip damage. However, there is a potential workaround to those downsides. If you had a hit-based spell which, when cast, turned on and then stayed active permanently without being recast, you would avoid the downsides of both mechanics. You could give that spell a large life cost for Unlight Silhouette without worrying about having to actually pay it more than once, and the sacrifice effect on Rathpith Globe would never trigger as long as you don't cast any other spells. So, do any spells fitting this criteria actually exist? There's two, in fact. Bladefall of Trarthus is turned on when cast, and then spends mana over time to keep its effect active. Unfortunately, Bladefall of Trarthus isn't a practical option because it spends mana and life over time. You can give it a flat cost, but if you then try to scale that cost to maximize the benefit from Unlight Silhouette, you'll very quickly burn through your mana and life pools trying to upkeep the overtime costs. This leaves only one remaining option. Tempest Shield. Yes, that Tempest Shield. It's intended to be a passive buff that gives you some additional chance to block spell damage, and the player base almost exclusively uses it for that alone. However, it also passively deals chaining hit damage to enemies when you block their attacks or spells, and comes with a respectable 220% effectiveness of added damage. This passive damage means we can take advantage of life stacking mechanics without being affected by their downsides. You're free to scale the life cost of Tempest Shield up to almost 100% of your maximum life, and you only have to pay that cost once when you turn it on. This essentially gives us passive Thorns damage, but now we have a way to scale it via life stacking. We can also actively cause the when you block damage on Tempest Shield by using the unique scepter Monastery Bell. Introduced in patch 3.27, this unique causes you to activate all of your on-block effects the first time you hit an enemy with a shield attack. Tempest Shield's damage counts as an on-block effect, and will therefore be procced when we hit with a shield attack. While any shield attack would work, Shield Charge is the best option. It has an acceptably fast base attack time, and also allows us to move around quickly while proccing our Thorns damage. Crucially, since Shield Charge is an attack, it does not activate the sacrifice effect on Rathpith Globe. You can use Shield Charge as fast as possible, activating Tempest Shield's damage with no downside. Additionally, while Monastery Bell activates the damage on Tempest Shield, this is not a trigger, so again, you will not activate the sacrifice effect on Rathpith Globe. The downside of Monastery Bell is supposed to be the unlucky block line, but that can be turned into an upside using Runegraft stability. This causes your lucky or unlucky effects to instead be rolled 3 times, picking the middle value. Without getting into the weeds on the math, this is a mini Svalin effect. It turns our 78-78 sheet block chance into 88-88% effective block chance. You now have 2 sources of damage from Tempest Shield, making this build surprisingly efficient. First is your passive Thorns, the damage that occurs whenever you block an enemy's attack or spell. The frequency of this damage depends on how often you're getting hit, and therefore scales with the type of content that you're playing. For example, in very dense breaches with large pack size, you get hit extremely frequently. All of those hits can activate this damage, provided you have high block chance, which we do thanks to Runegraft of Stability. The second type of damage is our active Thorns, the damage that occurs whenever you first hit an enemy with Shield Charge, using Monastery Bell. The frequency of this damage depends only on your attack speed with Shield Charge. You can therefore use a separate 4-link Shield Charge to get as much attack speed as possible, which ends up scaling the hit frequency of your Tempest Shield. This lets you focus all of the support gems in your 6-link on just getting % more damage modifiers. So, to summarize, the core concept of the build is as follows. 1. Stack as much life as possible through the usual means. Use the Apostate with a bunch of Energy Shield armor pieces, grab a handful of Corrupted Magic Jewels with % life and use the Adorned, path to all of the available % life clusters on the tree, etc., etc. 2. Turn all of that life into spell damage and crit chance with a Rathpith Globe. In Mirage League, you can use a version that's been corrupted with a Volatile Val Orb, though not necessary, to give you over 1000% increased damage and capped crit chance. 3. Use Tempest Shield as the source of damage to sidestep the Rathpith sacrifice effect. This prevents us from taxing our recovery, which either just makes us tankier or, alternatively, allows us to run Righteous Fire for its more damage multiplier. 4. Scale the life cost of Tempest Shield to get flat chaos damage with Unlight Silhouette while only having to pay that skill cost once. By scaling the life cost up to just shy of 100% of our maximum life, we can get almost 4,000 added chaos damage. This is frankly an obscene amount of chaos damage to get with no real downside. 5. Activate the damage on Tempest Shield with overcapped block chance and by using Shield Charge with Monastery Bell, scaled with a bunch of attack speed. Shield Charge can be scaled to almost 6 attacks per second, when socketed with a few attack speed supports in Essence of Insanity gloves and by using Runegraft of the Sinistral. 6. Be virtually immortal with the combination of a large hit pool from life stacking, pre-hit recovery with Defiance of Destiny, 88% effective block chance, a few endurance charges, and percent-based life regeneration. Turns out that everything here is actually pretty straightforward and just requires some currency. Except for number 4. Number 4 is complicated. Tempest Shield ordinarily has a mana reservation, but no life or mana cost. We can give it a base life cost with Runegraft of the Witchmark, and then wish to scale that life cost as close as possible to our maximum unreserved life without going over, to get the flat damage from Unlight Silhouette. All support gems will apply a multiplier to a linked skill's base cost. While the support gems on our Tempest Shield increase its life cost, resulting in more flat damage, they also increased its mana reservation. This creates a problem with scaling our life costs. The base life cost is 8% of our maximum life from the Runegraft, but the base mana reservation is 25% of maximum mana. Any scaling via gems will run us out of mana reservation room before we get our life cost to near our maximum life. To solve this, we need either a ton of mana reservation efficiency, like over 170%, too much to be practical, or a way to scale up skill costs independent of skill reservation. There are plenty of sources of percent increased mana cost of skills on both unique equipment and the skill tree. However, this is not useful for us as we need to scale life costs, not mana costs. There are only 2 sources of skill cost scaling in the game that don't specify mana cost: Jaquani's Potential and Indigon. Jaquani's Potential is not an option. It's a staff, and that precludes the use of a shield. Since this is a life-stacking spell build, Rathpith Globe is absolutely necessary. Therefore, the only option for scaling life cost is, paradoxically, Indigon, which is usually used in mana stacking builds. The relevant stat on Indigon is 50 to 60% increased cost of skills for each 200 total mana spent recently. We'll return to this later, but for a moment, just assume that we can consistently spend between 100 and 150 mana per second, no more and no less. Recently is in the last 4 seconds, so this gives us exactly 2 stacks for Indigon. With a maximum roll on the increased cost line of our Indigon, we get a 2.2x multiplier to Tempest Shield's life cost, and therefore its flat added chaos damage, without affecting its mana reservation. If we then proceed to pick up a few good sources of mana reservation efficiency, we'll be able to keep the reservation of Tempest Shield below 100% of our mana pool, while scaling its cost to near 100% of our life pool. Now we return to the question of how to ensure that we're consistently spending an appropriate amount of mana to permanently have 2 Indigon stacks. Bladefall of Trarthus re-enters the picture. Bladefall of Trarthus has a base mana cost of 5% of maximum mana per second, scaled as usual with gem multipliers and increased costs. We're aiming for 2 Indigon stacks, a 2.2x cost multiplier. With scaling from a support gem and the life mastery, the final mana spend on Bladefall of Trarthus is 12.26% of our maximum mana per second. With about 1100 maximum mana, this makes us spend about 130 mana per second, almost exactly in the middle of the required 100 to 150 mana envelope. With this balance of mana costs, at a steady state, Bladefall of Trarthus will indefinitely sustain 2 Indigon stacks, without ramping up or down. It should be noted that the steady state mana costs assumes you already have 2 Indigon stacks. To get those initial stacks, you have to jumpstart the mana spend, which can easily be accomplished using Arcane Cloak, which is hard-coded to spend 45% of current mana at level 1. With our 1100 maximum mana and a full mana globe, this is a 495 mana spend, giving us 2 Indigon stacks immediately. Turning on Bladefall of Trarthus shortly after activating Arcane Cloak will then permanently sustain those stacks. You need to restart this life cost scaling loop at the beginning of every map or mirage. The default state when you enter a map is Tempest Shield on and Bladefall of Trarthus off. I've settled on the following procedure, which takes about 5 seconds but is very repeatable. After a bit of practice, I got the muscle memory down and can accurately start the loop with near 100% success rate. As soon as you enter the map, first deactivate your Tempest Shield. This unreserves all of your mana. You can either wait 4 or 5 seconds for your mana globe to refill, or just pop your Writhing Jar flasks to refill it immediately. Then, activate Arcane Cloak, giving you 2 Indigon stacks. There's no indicator in the buff bar to see how many Indigon stacks you have, but it can be tracked if needed by monitoring your skill costs. Shortly after popping your Arcane Cloak, you should turn your Tempest Shield back on. This should reserve all of your mana and spend almost all of your life. You then wait a brief moment, less than a second, and activate Bladefall of Trarthus. This works almost 100% of the time to sustain 2 Indigon stacks. If you do the final step too fast or too slow, you will end up with either 1 or 3 stacks of Indigon instead of 2. You can check that you did the process correctly by hovering over Tempest Shield on the skill bar and verifying that its skill cost is just below your maximum unreserved life. So, to summarize, our Tempest Shield life cost and mana reservation are as shown in this table. The base 8% life cost and 25% mana reservation both receive the same multiplier from our support gems. However, the life cost gets an additional 2.2 times multiplier from Indigon, while the mana reservation gets reduced by 27% because of our reservation efficiency. The result is exactly what we're looking for. We've scaled our life cost to a large portion of our huge life pool, but left some room to reserve life for clarity, vitality, and precision. We've also kept the mana reservation below 100% with some room for comfort. While this wiggle room isn't strictly necessary, you want to be a bit below 100% so that you can walk through a mana siphoner bubble without turning off Bladefall of Trarthus. The payoff is Tempest Shield dealing an average hit of over 5 million damage. This is activated more than 5 times per second. The attack speed on Shield Charge plus Monastery Bell is 5.64 attacks per second. Plus, you get the passive activations from blocking. All told, Tempest Shield ends up dealing at least 25 million damage per second, or significantly more in dense content. The build is also nearly immortal with its large life pool, 88% effective attack and spell block, Defiance of Destiny pre-hit recovery, and percent life-based regeneration. This build is more than suitable for most endgame content. Even the Uber bosses were taken down with ease. I've killed multiple Uber bosses and the Feared entirely AFK. While it's not the zoomiest mapper, it still clears fast enough for Juiced Breach, which was my main farm. The next sections will discuss gem setups and utility skill selection, equipment, and the character's passive tree. The info is all in the linked path of building, but this video will help explain why I make some of the decisions that I do. It could be helpful context if you're interested in assembling the build yourself. The build's main skill and only 6-link is Tempest Shield, which is socketed in the body armor. While Tempest Shield does have some lightning damage built into the gem, it only provides 1800 base damage at level 20. This is dwarfed by the 4000 flat chaos damage that we add with our life stacking mechanics, especially when you consider the 220% effectiveness of added damage. For this reason, the most effective damage support is Void Manipulation, even though it removes that lightning damage and our ability to shock. We then use the crit supports. Increased critical strikes is needed for the added base crit chance to help overcome the low base crit on Tempest Shield. Along with our power charges and the scaling from Rathpith Globe, That'll bring us up to the crit cap, so increased critical damage is an obvious next choice for a damage support. The next support is Power Charge on Critical Strike. This gives us a moderate 20% more multiplier for damage, but is also a very easy way to generate the power charges that we need for crit. In Mirage League, we were able to imbue skill gems with a level 1 support, and this is the one that I chose. If the imbue feature does not go core, I would keep Power Charge on Critical Strike, but drop the next support gem, Cruelty. It's only used for its generic more damage multiplier. The final support gem is Greater Chain Support. The exceptional version is important for two reasons. First, it doesn't have the less damage multiplier that the regular version of Chain Support has. More importantly, it has a large 150% cost and reservation multiplier, which is helpful for scaling up the cost on Tempest Shield, a critical portion of the build's mechanics. Recall from the mechanics section that we'll be applying Tempest Shield's damage by attacking with the Monastery Bell using Shield Charge. We therefore dedicate a forelink to scaling the attack speed. Faster attacks and momentum support are the two most efficient attack speed options. For the final gem slot, we'll use additional accuracy support. This gets us close to accuracy capping in endgame content, which is needed because Shield Charge does need to hit through the enemy's evasion in order to trigger the damage on Tempest Shield. There are a number of support skills which, while not used often during gameplay, are necessary to make the mechanics of the build work. Arcane Cloak is used to jumpstart our mana spend. Righteous Fire is used for its more spell damage multiplier, and Bladefall of Trarthus is how we manage the mana over time spend rate needed to hold our Indigon stacks at a steady state. You can slot these gems wherever you have room, but ideally you should put Bladefall and Righteous Fire together so that they can share an Empower support. You'll need the cost multiplier from Empower to get Bladefall's mana spend at the right level, and the extra levels on Righteous Fire give it a few more % damage. I have a gem set up for 3 auras: Vitality, Precision, and Clarity. They all reserve against life using Arrogance support. Clarity is mandatory for the build. You'll need the additional mana regeneration that it gives to keep up with your Bladefall mana spend rate. The other 2 auras are technically optional. If you need to free up gem sockets in future leagues, you can drop them. Vitality is a nice quality of life, but honestly, the flat added life regeneration that it gives pales in comparison to % life regeneration on the passive tree due to our huge life pool. Precision is helpful for squeezing out a little extra accuracy, but with good enough gear, you won't need either its added accuracy or its crit chance. The rest of your gem slots are flexible, and you should have enough room for 1 to 2 forelinks. One caveat. Remember that if you use any spells, either manually casted or triggered, you'll activate the life sacrifice from Rathpith Globe. This kinda defeats the whole purpose of the build, so I recommend avoiding utility spells like Flame Dash or Guard skills. Fortunately, War Cries aren't spells, and so they don't trigger that sacrifice effect. I ended up using a 4-link Enduring Cry setup. With more duration and efficacy supports, the life regeneration buff lasts longer than the cooldown of a level 20 gem, so you can get 100% uptime on its effect. I also used Life Tap so that Enduring Cry wouldn't have any mana cost. This is crucial because you don't want any unpredictable mana spend which might interfere with your Indigon stacks. In Mirage League, I imbued my Enduring Cry with Urgent Orders support for a little extra Warcry speed, but this is just for quality of life. My final 4-link was used for an Animate Guardian setup. While Animate Guardian is a spell, there's no point to using it more than once per map, but the buffs that it provides can last the entire instance. The main point of the Animate Guardian was to provide a Zealotry aura via Guardian's Blessing. The physical degen from Guardian's Blessing is sustained with Meat Shield support plus the Guardian's gear, which is listed as a separate gear set in the Path of Building link. The build's equipment is all shown in the Path of Building, which is linked in the video description below. If you've played a Life Stacker before, some of the equipment used in this build should look familiar, but with a few substitutions to accommodate the required mechanics as discussed previously. The Path of Building includes 2 item sets. The first is my actual end-of-league gear, which should be considered aspirational. The second item set shows equipment at a significantly lower level of investment. No corruption plus it's on uniques, and all the rares are craftable with a fracture and some essence spamming until a single tier 1 explicit. This is what I'd consider to be the minimum viable product. If you're interested in the build, I'd recommend building up a few hundred divines, self-crafting gear similar to that shown in the low investment version, and buying mid-roll uniques. It's straightforward to upgrade to more aspirational gear, and like many Adorned builds, the ceiling for what you can spend is practically infinite. I won't cover each piece of equipment in detail, but I will give some general guidelines and mention a few of the key item mods which are necessary to keep the build running. First and foremost, remember how basically everything in this build scales off of our maximum life. Our number one priority is therefore to get tier 1 life rolls on all of our equipment, and large amounts of energy shield on our armor items, which are then turned into flat life with the Apostate. You'll need to craft a couple rares, your gloves and boots. Both of these items need a mod that comes exclusively from essences. On the boots, we need shock avoidance from a deafening essence of Torment, which will give us complete immunity when paired with an implicit mod. For the gloves, we need to use an essence of insanity to get the mod Socketed Gems have 16% more attack and cast speed. We'll be socketing our shield charge in this item so that the attack speed mod is basically just 16% more damage. The most straightforward way to craft both of these items is to start with bases with a tier 1 fractured life mod and roll with the essences until you get 2 suffixes that you're happy with. Basically, you're just looking for high rolls of resists or attributes. You can then add Eater and Exarch implicits and roll the prefixes with Eldritch Currency. On those prefixes, you're just looking for as much life, energy shield, and movement speed as possible. For your uniques, you don't need anything too special until you're at the point of min-maxing, but make sure you get versions that are sufficiently well rolled to cap your resistances. You will probably want to get a high roll on the Indigon skill cost line though. Remember that for Indigon and Rathpith Globe, the energy shield rolls really do matter, as those translate into flat life since we're using the Apostate. In the version of the build showcased here, I'm using a Mirage League unique build, Screams of the Desiccated, which is granting me the effects of Massive and Gloom Shrines. Essentially, this is 40% increased maximum life and a source of on-death explosions, which helps our clear speed. While I expect this item to go core beyond Mirage League, it may have questionable rarity in future leagues. Fortunately, it's easy to replace. If you're not using Screams of the Desiccated, you can swap off of the Nameless Ascendancy that gives you the 3rd ring so that you can get access to your flasks back. That Ascendancy point can then be instead used on Profane Bloom to replace the corpse explosions. You'd then use a Hunter-influenced belt, probably a Stygian Vise, with as much flat and percent life as possible. Mageblood would also be an option at higher investments. For your rings, there's a few crucial mods you need, but they can be spread out among all 3 rings to make crafting a bit easier. First, you need a Despair on Hit mod. This is important because it's the most convenient way to apply the curse without self-casting or triggering it, which would both activate the sacrifice effect on Rathpith Globe and ruin our life recovery. Fractured Despair on Hit rings are special rewards from Delve, so it's not super difficult to find these, although the fracture on a convenient base can get semi-expensive. If you care about Reflect immunity, take the Yugal Pantheon and then craft one of your rings with an Essence of Insanity. Another one of your rings should be crafted with a Deafening Essence of Misery to give you a bunch of increased mana regeneration rate. You'll need this to keep up with the mana over time costs from Bladefall of Trarthus. It goes without saying that you want tier 1 life rolls on all of these rings as well. You'll also need at least a couple mid-roll tiers of flat mana. Remember that we need our maximum mana to be somewhere between 1000 and 1100 so that our Bladefall of Trarthus mana spend is at an appropriate level to maintain Indigon stacks. Quality all of them up with Fertile Catalysts to boost the flat life and mana on them even further. Finally, you'll want to save a prefix slot on each ring for bench-crafted minus mana cost to skills. This makes shield charge cost close to no mana, which is important so that it won't interfere with the Indigon mana spend. The rest of your ring affixes should just be used to cap your resistances and get any remaining attributes that your build requires. This build makes heavy use of jewels in the passive tree. We'll need as many jewel sockets as possible, and we'll want to run at least 2 voices jewels. In my final version, I'm running double 3 passive voices, but you can get away with 5 passive versions if you can't afford the budget. This burns 4 passive points though, so it's one of the first upgrades I would focus on. One of those jewel sockets should be used for a Megalomaniac. There's quite a bit of flexibility in the notables that you're looking for, so don't worry about getting a very specific one. The one notable that you really want is Rote Reinforcement, which is our source of endurance charge generation. It also has added flat life and some attack block, both of which are stats that we're looking to maximize. For the other 2 passives on the Megalomaniac, just get as much block as possible, preferably spell block. Attack block can be solved with tattoos. If you're already block capped, just look for nodes that grant increased maximum life. The rest of the unique jewels are straightforward. Storm Shroud gives us ailment immunity, Rational Doctrine gives us a huge chunk of life regeneration and helps get close to curse immunity, and Foulborn Red Dream is used near the Marauder start with some tattoos as another source of increased maximum life. The remainder of your jewel sockets will be for an Adorned setup, which is an extremely efficient way of maximizing a single stat. Our corrupted magic jewels will all have 7% increased maximum life as a prefix and a mixture of critical strike multiplier and plus 2% to maximum fire resistance as suffixes. If you don't want to run Righteous Fire, you can forgo the fire resistance jewels and just go with crit multi. Obviously, you'll want as high of a roll on the Adorned as you can afford, but remember that there are breakpoints on its effect. The breakpoints for your 7% maximum life prefixes are 58, 72, and 86% on the Adorned. Unfortunately, this build isn't very SSF friendly. Rathpith Globe and Defiance of Destiny are in the global drop pool, but they're very high rarity. Indigon and the Apostate are drops locked behind pinnacle bosses, and the unique jewels that the build uses are all very difficult to acquire in solo self-found. Along the same lines, I wouldn't consider this build to be hardcore friendly. While it's extraordinarily tanky, the required items will be prohibitively rare in hardcore trade. Softcore trade is really the sweet spot for this build. The passive tree for this build is straightforward. However, its pathing is quite stretched out, reaching from the top of the passive tree to the bottom left. I wouldn't suggest trying to swap to this build until at least level 95 or 96. The passives really are that important. There are 2 versions of the passive tree in the linked path of building with minor pathing changes. The difference comes down to whether you have a sufficient number of jewels with corrupted or synthesized reservation efficiency implicits. With 4 or 5 of these jewels, you can drop the Severity wheel in the top left of the tree, saving a handful of passive points. The idea behind this tree is to, starting from the Witch, path alongside the outside left while picking up all nearby jewel sockets, life, and block notables. It's crucial that we get at least 6 life wheels so that we can take all of the life masteries, activating the 10% more maximum life that's available there. Remember not to put any Runegrafts on these masteries, or you'll lose that effect. While pathing towards jewel sockets, we're already close to several power charge and endurance charge notables, so we'll pick those up along the way for some extra damage and tankiness. We've already built in ways to generate the charges. We get power charges on critical strike from our support gems, and we get endurance charges when we block from our Megalomaniac, as discussed in the equipment section. It's safe to assume that both types of charges will have permanent uptime. We're already nearby several block wheels, which we take to help cap our attack and spell block chance. You'll want the Safeguard, As the Mountain, and Wall of Steel wheels. The only mastery that you care about for these wheels is the plus 1% chance to block spell damage per 5% chance to block attack damage. The rest of those masteries can be used as spots for your Runegrafts. You can make room for 2 more Runegrafts at the Hardy and Juggernaut wheels at the outside left of the tree. Speaking of runegrafts, you'll need to use a minimum of 3. Runegraft the Witchmark is absolutely mandatory as it adds the base life cost to Tempest Shield, enabling the whole build. Runegraft Stability is used to turn our unlucky block into an exciting block, removing the downside of Monastery Bell. Without this runegraft, our effective block would only be 60%, but with it, it jumps up to 87% because of how the math works out. Finally, the Runegraft of Treachery gives us some much needed reservation efficiency. This runegraft is helpful because it not only reduces the mana reservation of our Tempest Shield, but also applies to the life reservation of our 3 auras, which helps a bit with our max hits. The final runegraft that I'm using is the Runegraft of the Sinistral. This gives shield charge 10% more attack speed, which for us is equivalent to 10% more damage. This runegraft is very strong, but it is optional. You can leave it out until you have the passives to support it. The final point to consider on the passive tree are tattoos, which accomplish a few key things. First, I've tattooed all the strength nodes within the radius of my Foulborn Red Dream to instead grant fire resistance. This interacts with the Red Dream to provide additional maximum life from those travel nodes. This should be a very high priority. Second, I've tattooed 10 of my intelligence nodes, each with 5% reduced extra damage from critical strikes. Alongside the corruption implicit on the body armor, this gives us crit immunity. This isn't mandatory at all, but you'll feel noticeably tankier with it. I then tattooed another handful of my strength nodes to each give another 1% block chance to cap my attack block. How many you need will depend on what skills you get on your Megalomaniac. Your block chance is acceptably high even without any tattoos, but if you're min-maxing, you'll want to invest in these eventually to cap that chance. Finally, I use a couple more tattoos to pick up the resistances that I needed to cap. You can get away without using any tattoos at all, but they do give pretty strong effects. If you're crafting gear, you'll want to make sure that you have a few pieces with well-rolled, high-tier attribute modifiers so that you'll have enough attributes to be able to tattoo away all the stats on the tree while still meeting stat requirements. This was my end-of-league project for Mirage, and was far more successful than I expected. While it uses imbued gems and some volatile Val-orbed uniques, that's just for min-maxing and is not required, so this build will quite likely continue to function in future leagues with only minor adaptations. I did use a Mirage unique, Screams of the Desiccated, and while I expect this item to go core, it might have questionable rarity. Regardless, if it's not available in the future, it can be replaced as discussed in the equipment section. I don't consider any of the mechanics used here to be bugs. They're just niche combinations of expected behavior, so I expect the mechanics to be immune to patch notes. There's a slight possibility that Unlight Silhouette will be nerfed in the future to not apply to spells with a reservation. This is the case for some other mechanics that add flat damage to spells, like Archmage. I fully expect the build to be fine late into 3.29, but beyond that, who knows. I hope that this video has given you some ideas of tech that you can work into your own builds. If you enjoyed the video, you can support the channel by subscribing, leaving a comment to boost it in the algorithm, and by bumping the official forum post linked in the video description. As always, thank you for your support.